G'day Internet and welcome back to another video. This is going to be a follow-up on my previous video on the Sega Master System and some of the RGB improvements I did on that machine. Primarily thanks to the YouTube comments on that one. Yes, there were some useful YouTube comments on that video. I've worked out a slightly better way of doing that, so I'll show you that probably first up. And then we're going to take a look at the Master System 2, which is actually my personal favourite, because this is the one that I grew up with. Now, I've actually already done these mods on my Master System 2, and so I made a quick phone call to Mark from the Retro channel, and I went, how would you like me to mod your Master System 2? And he was more than happy, so this is actually his, and this is the one we're going to be working on. But first up, let me show you the changes that I've made to the modifications on my Master System 1. So here is the motherboard out of my Master System 1 once again, and you may notice that the wiring I ran over to the 1145 and the back of the DIN is now gone. And also that ferrite in here that we popped out is back in place. And what that means is the composite pin on the DIN plug is now reconnected and exactly how it should be. The reason was this. I had a bunch of people say that, oh, no, pin 7, which I believe is that one, yep, this one here, already has a sync signal. So I thought, okay, and I took, and we'll get to this bit in a minute, I hacked the plug off because it was a sealed plug off my SCART. I rewired the C-Sync to that particular pin, plugged it all in, and it still didn't work. My guess is that whatever electronics are going on in here doesn't like the C-Sync signal that's coming out of that pin standard here, and or my upscaler doesn't like it either. So what we wanted to do is, or what we needed to do is rewire that sync pin. And if I flip this over, you can see my wire. And all I did was cut the trace for that pin just here. You may not be able to see it, but it is cut. And I've done it in such a way that if I ever want to reverse it, I can just simply bridge a couple of these with another bodge wire. And I've run it down to pin 11 off the 1145. And that seems to be the big difference. That pin is normally wired to pin 10, which is C-Sync into the 1145, and it doesn't seem to like that signal. But wiring it to the pin which is actually labelled C-Sync out, it's all fine. So between cutting that trace and putting that wire in and modifying my cable, which I'll show you momentarily, this now no longer requires that composite C6 switch, and so you don't actually have to drill any holes in your Master System. Now obviously I already had a hole drilled in, so I used that as a switch for a 5060 mod. So that is the Master System 1 and the improvements I made to that. Now you might get lucky, you might simply get a cable, plug it in and it just works. I can't say that worked for me. So that is the Master System 1. Right, now let's take a look at the Master System 2, but first the cable and the modifications I had to make. So here we have two Master System / Mega Drive SCART cables. These are just the off-the-shelf ones I bought locally here in Australia. And you'll notice already that one has a different plug to the other. This is the one that I've already modified, and this is the one we're about to modify. And essentially what we need to do is this. If I zoom in, this is our plug, and this pin here is the C-Sync signal that I showed you that we wired up in the Master System 1, and the next one round is composite. Now, these are by default wired to that composite pin there for sync. And what we want to do is we want to move that signal to pin, it's technically pin 1 here, which means basically desoldering the wire from inside here, moving it across one pin and wiring it up. Small problem with that, and that is that this is a sealed plug. There's no way of really easily getting into this. So there's really only one thing for it. Righto, now we need to re-terminate this cable. So this is the plug we're going to use. Now there's two very similar 8-pin DIN plugs that you can buy. This one, you'll notice, it's what I call a U-shape one, and it basically means that the top 2 pins here are spaced slightly wider. The other very similar one is what I call the 270-degree one, and the pins kind of stay in more of a circle, and those top 2 pins are more set in to the actual plug. This is actually the same plug that Commodore 64s use as well. Unfortunately, not one that I was able to just duck down to JCar. JCar seemed to only sell the 270-degree ones. So these ones I got from RS Online, and I will put a link in the description. So the first thing we have to do is map out our wire colors that come out of the cable, so we know which wire to solder to where. Now the easiest way I found to do this is because we already know what all these pins here did do, we can simply map it out with a multimeter. So let's start with yellow. I'm gonna guess that yellow is probably comp, and it is, so we scribble that down. Whoops, yellow. Blue, what are the chances blue is blue? Pretty good. And what are the chances red is red? Right, so I've mapped those out, and the only thing we actually want to do is to move this to there. So as much as I hate soldering DIN connectors, that is our next step. Okay, with our soldering iron heated up, let's get these terminals tinned. Right, and before we do anything else, don't forget to slide this thing over the cables. The amount of times I've done a plug and then gone nuts. So the only thing left to do now is to wire the cable up. Don't forget that we're kind of sort of working in reverse, so pin 1 is here. So we'll start with that. So pin 1 is now our composite sync, which is yellow. Right, there's our cable wired up. It's just a matter of putting the covers back on it, and then we'll move on to the next bit. So what we have here is the main board out of Mark's Master System 2. This is a power board, but as far as I'm aware, they're pretty much all the same. Now, once again, the chip we're interested in is the CXA1145, which, as I mentioned in my previous video, isn't the video chip per se, but more of a video mixer, so a bunch of signals go in and a bunch of different signals go out. And we're going to be tapping into a whole bunch of signals coming out of this chip, but we're going to do it on the reverse side. So if I flip this over, pin 1 is, where are we? pin 1 is here, and pin 24 is here. Now, the ones we're interested in are, we need to pick up a ground, so we'll use either one of these, probably this one because this has already got a bodge wire connected to it. So we're going to want a ground. We're then going to want R, G and B, which are the next pins along. We're then going to want composite because we are going to wire this up for a regular composite as well. And then if we come down to here on the other side of this wire, pin 1 is our 5 volts, so we can grab 5 volt from there. And the next one along, sorry, that is actually pin 12, I should say, because that's 1, that's 12. And then pin 11 is our C-sync signal. So I'm going to start by grabbing some rainbow ribbon cable. We'll tin this, we'll tin as we go the ends of the wires to try and keep it neat. And we'll wire in a cable to this. So just before I get started, the other one we're obviously going to need is audio, which is actually on pin 9. So if we count back 12, 11, 10, 9, that's audio on that one there. So let me start by tinning here what I need. Okay, so this is my length of cable. I would suggest you give yourself a reasonable amount, a length. So because we're going to be coming out to a DIN connector here, I'm going to wire it that way, which is this way. So I'm going to do my best to try and keep it as neat as possible, like this. I'm not too worried about color coding. It's just a matter of keeping track of what wire goes where. And that bodge wire, it keeps getting in the way. Righto, that's all our wires tacked in. You probably noticed that I got the shits with that bit of hot glue on that bodge wire. But speaking of hot glue, I think at this point I should put some in. We're actually going to end up coming kind of around, because I don't want... Okay, I'm going to trim these so we don't have a sharp surface. And then we're pretty much right just to come straight out. So I'm going to put some hot glue on here to hold them in place. I'll put this bit of hot glue back in, and then we'll move on to the next step. So with that all done, our next step is to actually remove the RF modulator, because, well, Mark already said he's not going to use it. I've removed it on all of mine. So yeah, it does require the removal of the RF modulator. So let's heat up the desoldering gun. And remove this. No more RF modulator. So for the next bit, we need to wire up a very small circuit board just on some perf board, velo board, whatever you want to call it. So let me get the bits together for that and I'll show you what's next. So what we need to do is we need to run the composite signal through a resistor and a capacitor, and we need to run each of the color signals through a resistor as well. Now, I just want to point out that I'm sure if you took this circuit and ran it through an oscilloscope or something, improvements could be made. This is simply a solution I came up with just poking around and purely trial and error. But it works for me and hopefully it may work for other people as well. So this is simply an offcut that I've got left over from something. Right, so if we map out our 4 lines that we're going to need, 1, 2, 3, 4, and if we leave a row or 2 to actually solder the wires in eventually, we want to put in 4 75 ohm resistors. So let me get that started. Right, next we're obviously going to need to cut the traces between all of those. And then test it with a multimeter. Now this will go beep, but it should only show 75, 75, 75, 75-ish. Right. Okay, I think we're good there, just purely for the sake of it. Right, the only other component we need here is a 220 UF capacitor, and we'll simply pick one of the lines. I'm going to use the end one, and the positive side of the capacitor goes towards the resistors. So let's drop U in there like that, and solder U in. And we need to kill the trace between it as well. Right, and we should have nothing between those 2 points. And we don't. Good. Okay, what I need to do now is actually trim my little bit out. We're going to need to leave a row for the wires to go in, so I'm going to cut it here. And we can come up the side here. Whoop. There we go, there's our little circuit. Now I'll bring the master system board back in and we'll start wiring this up. So we're back with our master system board. This is the wiring that we took care of before. Our RF modulator's gone and we have our wee little circuit board, which will eventually end up there. I'll probably use some heavy duty double-sided mounting tape. I've already gone ahead and cut. The wires we're interested in here at the moment is composite R, G and B, because they're the ones that need resistors and stuff put in. So I've cut them at a reasonable length and tinned the ends. So these go into what I consider the resistor side of this little circuit, and the composite goes on the line that we put the capacitor on. So if I carefully feed these through and hold them in place with my finger on the back. Now remember that at this point in time, the order of the color signals doesn't really matter, as long as they come out of this at the other end in the same order. So this is a little tricky because I don't have huge amounts of length to work with, but they're in, and if I turn this around and flip this over, we have our 4 wires. When I stripped and tinned these, I did kind of strip them back more than I normally would, primarily because it makes this particular job at least a little easier. And now, hopefully without them moving around too much, I now need to solder these wires in. Okay, they're all nice and firm. Let's trim off a little bit of this excess. The green wire went for a bit of a walk, but it's not going to touch anything. So this is actually the offcuts that when I trimmed this off, and we actually want these again, because waste not, want not, because these are the wires that will eventually go to our DIN connector. So once again, let's strip off more than we normally would. And let's separate them at least a little to make life a bit easier, and we will tin these. And our green wire. All right, and we simply put these in the same order they kind of at the other end. So green goes to green, etc., etc. My green wire ended up separate for some reason, but that's all right. Hopefully it'll make this a little easier. Come on. Right, good, and we take this, and this comes in, well, red, orange, yellow, so we'll put this in as red, orange, and yellow, and fold those over. And very carefully solder these in. Okay, we're good. So if we bring this all back in, it looks like a bit of a mess at the moment, but I'll double-side sticky tape that there, and then we have all the wires we need that will go to our DIN connector. So this is our DIN plug here, which is what we're obviously going to be wiring to. But before we wire to this, this needs to be mounted in the case. So let's just get rid of that for a second, and I will grab the bottom of the case, get rid of you. Now, we're going to put it exactly where the RF outlet was, just here. And we need about a 14mm hole. And I'm simply going to use a step bit, and wish me luck. Let's see how we go. One thing I should do is actually mark on the bit where 15mm actually is. 14mm, sorry. So 14mm is... oh, actually I think that was 14mm. Hang on. Get you in there. No, we need to go up to 16. Right. And there we go. Nice. Get rid of all that. While we've got the drill out, I am going to dig out a couple of tiny screws that we're going to use for mounting it. Just some little self-tappers. Where's the matching one? Is that matching? Matching-ish. And a drill bit to suit, because these are self-tappers, so obviously we don't want to go too oversized. That looks quite good. And stick this in our drill. Get this lined up as square as possible, and simply yep, and just to make sure I haven't completely screwed that up, these should go in. Obviously it's a bit tight the first time round because it's cutting in the thread. So that's actually what the finish will look like. But for now, I'm now going to pull it back out, get rid of the drill. Put those screws to one side and probably promptly lose them. Okay. So, this is what we now have to work with. Let's take our board and drop it in. I'm not going to bother putting the RF shields back in, but obviously if you're going to, this is when you would. These should be roughly the right length-ish. If that goes there, we still want some room to play with, and it doesn't matter if it bunches up inside. Now, what we want to do, let's start by stripping and tinning all of these. Right, with that done, let's get the DIN connector and tin this. Right, and now, as it would come as no surprise, it's time to solder the wires up. But, for the love of God, don't forget to feed it through the hole first and then solder it up. Ask me how I know. So I have my map. We've got our pin out, and this should be fairly simple. Okay, so that is now done. Get rid of you, get rid of the soldering iron. Whoops. Now all I want is a piece of double-sided sticky tape and some scissors that's about right for that. Let's actually go this direction. All right. We'll put this on the bottom of our little circuit board. We can trim that a little. And you can go right there, and this can now be screwed in. Right, before we put the cover on it, let's give it a test. So excuse the kind of rubbish camera on screen routine, but just to show you that it's working. And there we have Alex Kidd in pretty decent image quality. Nice. I'm really happy with that, actually. So the mask system is now all back together and running beautifully, even through my cheapo SCART to HDMI converter thing. Now there is just a few things I wanted to touch on. I basically found my way through the dark with this. When I first started, I simply had it wired straight up to the CXA 1145 chip with some resistors and so on and so forth, and that was using a straight through handmade SCART cable. So then when I got these bought ones, it really didn't want to play the game. When I first wired it up just directly without any of the extra resistors and stuff, this is a quick photo here of what it looked like, and you'll notice that the green trees in the background are missing their kind of dark green shadow. So it wasn't, when I then tried to put the 75 ohm resistors into the three RGB lines, it came good. So I was happy with that. Now I'm sure if I was to throw in like capacitors for filtering or something that I completely don't understand, it might get better, but for now I'm pretty happy with that output that I'm getting. So if you found that useful, I'm glad. Like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and I'm going to go play some Alex Kidd, and I'll see you in the next one.